Have you ever gone to the aesthetics wiki page, scrolling mindlessly through the countless aesthetics before you, noticed that there are a lot of aesthetics that revolve around nuclear energy and the atomic bomb? Beyond that, a speculative version of the 1940s and the 1950s? Why is that? Well, today we're going to do a bit of delving into the world of just a few of these aesthetics, and I'll give my thoughts as to why they exist and my opinions on them as a whole. For starters, we'll be exploring atom punk, as I feel it's one of the more well-known aesthetics, even if you don't exactly know it by name. Even if you don't know it by name, I can almost guarantee that you know a piece of media that falls into this aesthetic. We'll be talking a bit more about the media for these aesthetics in a bit, but for right now, let's talk about the origins of atom punk. Originating in 1950 as a form of counterculture to ray gun futurism, which we'll also be discussing shortly, it is seen as the darker version of the ray gun futurism aesthetic. It was born from the mind of Philip K. Dick, who wrote the book known as Solar Lottery, which is believed to be the birthplace of atom punk. The key motifs include nuclear-based power, space travel, hover technology, bright colors, and the key values include endless technological advancements and pulp comic vibes as described on the Wikipedia page. Some of the media for this aesthetic include the Fallout series, both the game and TV show, Futurama, and my personal favorite, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. Even though most pictures and pieces of art you see depicting the aesthetic will feature megastructures, that's not quite everything atom punk has to offer. Another huge contributor to the aesthetic revolves around post-nuclear media that was created in response to Cold War anxieties, such as I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which also goes back to the speculative and alternate history of the 1940s and 1950s. The next aesthetic that I wanted to talk about was the previously mentioned ray gun futurism, aka ray gun gothic. It was created by Philip Francis Nolan, an American sci-fi writer who is mostly popular for creating the character Bucky Rogers. Ray gun gothic is the more positive side of atom punk, a more positive approach with never-ending advances in technology. This is where we see the ideas of flying cars and so much more common futuristic ideas. It originated in the late 1940s, with Buck Rogers being the first ever piece of media to stem from it. Later, media such as Star Trek, Meet the Robinsons, and even some recent as Starfield would be created to fall into this aesthetic. Contrary to atom punk, it was created as a response to the public's hopefulness to the future, the excitement of what could be in store and what life might be like anywhere from 20 to 50 years from then. Of course, it seems silly now, since obviously we don't have flying cars or anything like that, but at that time, we didn't really know what we'd have today. Let's slightly shift gears, going back a little further, the 1920s to be exact. The Roaring Twenties, mass consumerism galore. The art of the time was having a slight shift, as art does for many decades. Jazz is increasing in popularity, but not only that, there's new inventions such as radios and washing machines. Decopunk takes that and runs with it, taking these little bits of information and expanding on it tenfold. It's basically BioShock in real life. It's America's steampunk. It's the expansion of what speculated life would be like without the stock market crash. Before we go into how these aesthetics influence their time and culture, I would like to briefly talk about what makes an aesthetic, well, an aesthetic. There's a concept which you've likely learned about before called color theory, or to put it more simply, the behavior of colors. What that means is how colors mix and blend together, how colors harmonize, and how colors contrast, along with several ideas. It's one of the biggest ideas in art that you often learn about quite early on in any art class. Even if you realize it or not, each color has several interpretations of what feelings they signify. For example, red often means love, but can also have darker symbolism as well. Going back to the aesthetics I mentioned, we see a lot of gold, in most cases apart from atom punk, which makes sense when you think about it. Gold signifies wealth, it symbolizes luxury, and everything in between. It makes perfect sense to see that color sprinkled all around these, but it's not an atom punk. In lots of atom punk examples, you see colors that could be described as dirty and grotesque, and even a bit harsh. You'll see darker skies and main characters put into hazardous situations, all revolving around robots and stuff like that. It makes perfect sense though, because the aesthetic, like I said earlier, was meant to deconstruct the optimism from Reagan Gothic. It was used for caution of the plausible dangers that could rise from all of these advances in technology, such as, and primarily, technology gaining sentience and taking over humanity, which was a pretty popular fear. Now, going on to time period and connections, cultural significance, and all of that stuff, the main connection I have to present to you all is that media, from games to films, are still being created that fall under these aesthetics. There will always be a future, whether the future you're referring to is tomorrow or 5,000 tomorrows from now. What makes this art still possible is that no one still knows what the future may hold. Maybe in another 100 years we might have flying cars, or we might be living on a whole new planet. Maybe spaceships are more accessible than cars. It's truly impossible to tell. Nothing is completely out of reach when you add time, because you simply cannot know for certain what will happen. Yes, there's a chance none of this will happen, but there's a chance that all of what I listed might happen, and that's what people build off of. And that can be said for any piece of speculative art. It envisions a future, possibly absurd, but one of the biggest parts of humanity and being alive is to create. People are constantly creating something, even if you don't think that's true. You create questions, answers, music, books, art, ways of thinking, friends, fandoms, and so much more. So much is created in general, and so much is created as a way to cope. Art is one of the biggest forms of expression used, in general, and not just drawing or painting, but also stories and through music, envisioning what life could have been, as it may be almost devastating sometimes. There's also a certain comfort to seeing an alternative reality where things could have worked out in favor. People make all sorts of speculative content, from my personal favorite, speculative biology, to speculative history, and so much more. Furthermore, ever since the parallel universe theory was created, alternative universes have been explored in so much, from life, where frogs are the highest on the food chain and evolved similarly to humans, to universes where there are mirrored versions of self that have a version of you that is slightly different, to everything in between. It's been explored in TV shows and movies, but also in people's personal artwork, and for many, the idea that there's many more universes out there with a version of them is comforting in so many ways. My main takeaway is going back to the beginning of the video, is that there are so many speculative versions of decades and historical events because it's how people commonly cope with disasters. Crafting a world where life is better makes people feel better, creating utopias to raise children in, as opposed to raising children now where inflation is a major issue, as well as homelessness and, depending on where you live in the world, war. And with that, I leave you with the question, what would future speculative histories of today look like? How would today be reimagined in the future? Thank you for watching as always, and I'll be seeing you.